Husband's fiery revenge on his cheating wife when she returned from her business trip. My name is Rob, and I'm 33 years old. For the last few years, my life felt like a carefully curated picture of contentment. I had a secure job, a house we'd turned into a home, and Emily, my wife, who I thought was my partner for life. Everything seemed perfect, until that fateful day when cracks began to show. Emily had left for what she claimed was a critical business trip to New York. She was excited, her eyes shining with a kind of determination that seemed almost infectious. I wanted to be supportive, to believe that her career was truly as important as she made it sound. But something gnawed at me, a tiny seed of doubt. It grew more insistent as the days passed. On the fourth night of her trip, I found myself alone in our living room, silence around me almost oppressive. I glanced at the clock, almost midnight. I was trying to ignore the unease bubbling up inside me, but it was impossible. It was as if a storm was brewing in the back of my mind, and I couldn't push it away. That's when I noticed the laptop on the coffee table. It was Emily's, and usually I wouldn't have touched it without her permission. But tonight, the nagging feeling inside me pushed me to do something I'd never done before. I decided to look through her emails. I tried to reason with myself that it was only to check on some shared documents, but deep down, I knew the real reason. As I powered up the laptop and logged in, my heart pounded with a mix of guilt and anticipation. The screen lit up, and there they were, her emails. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of what I was about to uncover. But curiosity, or perhaps a darker sense of need, drove me forward. The first email I opened was from a man named Adam. The casual tone was disarming at first, just a friendly check-in it seemed. But as I scrolled down, my stomach sank. Their exchange was far from ordinary. It was intimate and personal, filled with jokes that only close friends or something more would share. I found myself reading through email after email, each one more incriminating than the last. They talked about meeting up in secret, and I saw pictures, photos of them together, looking far too comfortable, too close. My mind reeled with each revelation, the reality of her betrayal hitting me like a tidal wave. How could she? I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The anger and disbelief roiled inside me, and I needed to talk to someone, anyone, to share the weight of this newfound burden. I reached for my phone and dialed Emily's number. Hello? Her voice was light, cheerful, grated on my nerves, a stark contrast to the storm inside me. Hey, Em, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. How's the trip? Oh, it's been busy but good, she replied. We've had some long meetings, but I think I'm really making progress. I miss you, though. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. Yeah, I miss you too. It's been quiet here. Everything's fine. Good to hear, she said, sounding genuinely pleased. I'll be back in a couple of days. Can't wait to see you. Yeah, I can't wait either, I replied, my voice tight. Talk to you soon. We ended the call, and I was left alone with my turbulent thoughts. I paced the room, trying to find some semblance of calm. My mind was racing, already formulating a plan. I needed to make her understand the depth of her betrayal. But I didn't want to act impulsively. I wanted to be strategic, to hit where it would hurt the most. I sat down at the dining table and grabbed a notepad, my hand trembling as I wrote down my thoughts. The anger was morphing into a cold, calculated determination. If Emily thought she could deceive me without consequences, she had another thing coming. The first thing on my list was to gather evidence, solid proof that she couldn't deny. I already had the emails, but I needed more. I began to plan how I would collect additional details that would be undeniable. Then, I started thinking about how to confront her. I wanted it to be dramatic, something she couldn't ignore or brush off. I imagined her face when she walked through the door and saw everything laid out before her. Her lies, her deceit, all exposed. The days seemed to drag on with a slow, painful pace. I found myself obsessively checking her emails, looking for any additional clues that might come my way. I spent sleepless nights crafting my revenge, ensuring that every detail was meticulously planned. One evening, as I sat alone in the dim light of the living room, I realized how far I'd gone. My thoughts were consumed by revenge, and I felt a pang of guilt for letting my life be dominated by anger. But then I thought about the betrayal, the broken trust, and the love that had been tainted. It made me resolute. I was ready for her return. When Emily walked back into our home, I wanted her to feel the full weight of her actions. I wanted her to see the destruction she had caused, to experience the heartbreak she had inflicted on me. The day of her return approached, and I could hardly contain my anticipation. I felt like a coiled spring, ready to unleash my carefully prepared plan. It wasn't about revenge for its own sake. It was about justice, about making sure that she understood the consequences of choices. As I waited for her to come back, I couldn't help but think about how our life together had changed. What was once a partnership built on trust and love was now a battleground of emotions. The image of our happy life had been shattered, and I was determined to show her just how deeply she had hurt me. The storm inside me was far from over. Was only beginning. The day Emily was supposed to return finally arrived, and the atmosphere in our house was charged with a palpable tension. I had spent the last few days meticulously preparing for this moment, ensuring that everything was in place for the confrontation I had been planning. As I stood in the living room, checking the clock for what felt like the 100th time, I found myself struggling to maintain a semblance of normalcy. My heart raced with anticipation, but I forced myself to act as if everything was perfectly ordinary. I was determined to execute my plan with precision, catch her completely off guard. The front door creaked open, and I heard her familiar voice calling out from the hallway. "Rob, I'm home." Her tone was light and carefree, as if she were coming back from a routine trip, rather than a journey that had broken the very foundation of our marriage. I took a deep breath and made my way to the door to greet her. My heart pounded in my chest, but I plastered a welcoming smile on my face. As I rounded the corner, I saw her standing there, luggage in hand, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Welcome back." She rushed over to me and wrapped her arms around me in a warm embrace. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to enjoy the familiarity of her touch, even though the reality of her betrayal was searing through me. I returned her hug, my arms feeling heavy with the weight of what was to come. "I missed you so much," she said, pulling back to look at me with a smile that seemed genuine. "How's everything been while I was gone?" "Oh, I replied, forcing a chuckle. "Just the usual. The house feels a bit quieter without you." She laughed softly, a sound that used to comfort me but now only amplified the chasm between us. "I'm glad to be back. Can't wait to catch up and relax." This trip was exhausting. I took her luggage and led her into the living room, where everything was arranged just as it had been before she left. The normalcy was a facade, carefully constructed to keep her off balance. I needed her to think nothing was amiss, that everything was as she left it. As we settled in, she began recounting her trip, the meetings, the networking events, and the small details that, under different circumstances, I might have found interesting, but now every word felt like a mockery of the truth. "So how was the conference?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation flowing. "Did you meet anyone interesting?" "It was great," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "I met so many new people, and there were some amazing presentations. I even made a few contacts who might help with our future project." "That sounds promising," I replied, nodding, though my mind was elsewhere. I kept glancing at the clock, mentally counting down the minutes until I could execute the next phase of my plan. After we had dinner together, which I made as pleasant as possible, Emily excused herself to unpack. I seized the opportunity to set the stage for the confrontation. I had already prepared a series of documents and photographs, all the evidence of her betrayal that I had gathered. They were neatly arranged on the coffee table, waiting for her to see them. As I waited, my mind raced through the scenarios of how this would unfold. The anger I felt was still there, but it was now tempered by a cold, calculated resolve. I wanted her to see everything, understand the full extent of what she had done. Emily finally emerged from the bedroom, looking refreshed but somewhat tired. She stretched and then walked into the living room, where I was sitting with a carefully crafted expression of calm. "Rob, do you want to watch a movie or something?" she asked, her voice light. "It's been a long day, and I thought it might be nice to unwind." I shook my head slowly. "Actually, there's something I need to show you first." Her brow furrowed in confusion. What's going on? I nodded toward the coffee table, where the evidence was laid out. I've been doing a bit of digging while you were gone. Her eyes followed my gesture, and the color drained from her face as she took in the sight of the emails, photos, and other documents. The silence between us grew heavy, filled with the unspoken weight of betrayal. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling as she picked up the first email. I leaned back in my chair, trying to read her reaction. You know exactly what it is, Emily. This is just a small part of what I've discovered. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and panic. Rob, I can explain. Held up a hand, cutting her off. There's no need for explanations, Emily. The evidence speaks for itself. I've seen everything. The emails, the photos, the plans you made with Adam. She stumbled back as if physically struck by my words. Rob, please, it was a mistake. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I shook my head, feeling a wave of sadness and frustration. A mistake? Is that what you call it? A mistake does involve planning secret meetings and exchanging intimate photos. This was deliberate, and it hurt me deeply. Tears began to well up in her eyes, and she reached out toward me. I'm so sorry, Rob. I never meant to hurt you. Please, can't we just talk about this? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my anger begin to dissolve into a more profound sense of sadness. We can talk, but first, you need to understand the full impact of what you've done. I want you to see the consequences of your actions. Only then can we even begin to figure out where to go from here. Emily sat down heavily on the couch, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched her, feeling a mixture of pity and determination. Confrontation was just beginning, and while I had planned for this moment, I had no idea how it would end. All I knew was that I needed her to fully grasp the pain she had caused me. The evening stretched on, filled with strained silence and occasional choked sobs from Emily. I stayed calm and composed, my mind focused on ensuring that she understood the depth of her betrayal. It was painful to watch her unravel, but it was necessary. She needed to face the reality of her actions, no matter how hard it was for either of us. As the night wore on, I realized that this was only the beginning of a much longer and more painful process. The storm had arrived, and it was far from over. The days following Emily's return felt like they were dragging on, each one heavier than the last. I had already set my plan into motion, determined to make sure she faced the full impact of her betrayal. I wanted her to realize that her actions had consequences far beyond what she could have imagined. The first phase of my revenge was subtle. I started by revealing small, deliberate clues to Emily, making sure she would find them on her own. Each piece of evidence was designed to dig deeper into her guilt, to make her confront the reality of what she had done. One evening, I casually mentioned a dinner party I was planning for the upcoming weekend. I thought it might be nice to have a few friends over, I said, trying to sound nonchalant, just to catch up and have a good time. Emily looked up from her book, her expression a mix of surprise and anxiety. A dinner party? That sounds interesting. Who did you invite? Just a few close friends, I replied, watching her closely. I thought it would be good to get out of the house and socialize. I'll need your help with the preparations. She nodded, her smile tight. Sure, I'll help. I just hope everything goes smoothly. The dinner party was a carefully orchestrated event. I had invited a handful of people who knew Emily well, and I had made sure they were aware of the situation, though not the detail. I wanted Emily to feel the weight of her actions in front of people who knew us both. I wanted her to experience the discomfort of her friends questioning her behavior, even if indirectly. As the evening of the party approached, I could see the strain on Emily's face. She tried to put on a brave front, but it was clear that the pressure was getting to her. She busied herself with the preparations, and I made sure to keep the conversations light and focused on the event. The guests arrived, and the evening unfolded with an uneasy mix of social pleasantries and underlying tension. Emily greeted everyone with her usual charm, but there was an edge to her demeanor. I could see her glancing around nervously, as if waiting for something to happen. At one point, during a lull in the conversation, I casually mentioned a recent development at work, a small detail about a project I had been working on. I said, I was actually discussing a few things with Adam, a colleague from the New York office. He's been really helpful with some of the logistics. Emily's face went pale, and she tried to cover it with a forced laugh. Oh, Adam, I remember him. You always spoke highly of him. Yes, I said, letting the name linger. He's been quite instrumental in helping me with some of the more challenging aspects of the project. Discomfort was palpable. I could see Emily's mind racing, her face a mixture of guilt and anxiety. She excused herself from the conversation, and I watched her retreat to the kitchen, where she busied herself with serving drinks. As the evening progressed, I made sure to drop more subtle hints about Adam and the project, each one calculated to remind Emily of her betrayal. I wanted her to understand that her actions were not just a private matter, something that affected everyone around her. After the guests had left, Emily and I were alone in the quiet of our home. The atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. I could see the strain in her shoulders, the way her eyes avoided mine. I can't believe the evening went so well, she said, trying to sound upbeat as she began clearing the table. Everyone seemed to have a good time. Yeah, I replied, my voice calm but firm. They did. But it's funny how conversations can sometimes reveal more than we expect. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. Rob, can we talk about this? I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. Of course, I said, gesturing for her to sit down. I think it's time we had a serious discussion about what's been going on. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the remnants of our dinner still on the plates between us. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Emily, I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I need you to understand that what you did has deeply hurt me. It's not just about the betrayal. It's about the lies and the deception. She looked down, hands trembling. I know, Rob, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice breaking. And now, every time I look at you, I'm reminded of the pain you caused. I need you to face that pain, understand the consequences of your actions. The next few days were marked by a series of orchestrated events designed to make Emily confront the reality of her betrayal. I began dropping more evidence in places where she would find it. Personal messages from Adam, intimate photographs, and even a few of their plans for future meetings. Each time she discovered a new piece of evidence, her reaction grew more frantic. She would confront me with tears in her eyes, begging for forgiveness, but I remained resolute. I wanted her to understand that this wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about acknowledging the full scope of her betrayal. One evening, as I was preparing for another round of revelations, Emily came to me with a pleading look on her face. Rob, please. I know I've made mistakes, but can't we try to work through this? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Took a deep breath, my heart aching at her words. Emily, it's not just about working through this. It's about understanding the depth of what you've done. I need you to see how your actions have affected me, how they've shattered the trust we once had. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, Rob. I'm so sorry. I just don't know how to fix this. I looked at her, feeling a mix of sympathy and resolve. First step is facing the consequences of your actions. Only then can we even begin to think about rebuilding. The days continued to unfold with the same pattern of revelations and confrontations. Each day, Emily faced a new layer of the betrayal, a new reminder of the hurt she had caused. It was a painful process, but it was necessary. I needed her to confront the full impact of her actions, to truly understand what she had done. Tension in our home was palpable, constant reminder of the broken trust between us. I watched as Emily struggled to come to terms with her actions, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. I knew that this was only the beginning of a long and painful journey, but I was committed to seeing it through. As the days passed, I could see the toll it was taking on Emily. She was no longer the confident, carefree woman who had left for her trip. Instead, she was a shadow of her former self, consumed by guilt and anxiety. It was a small solace to me, knowing that she was beginning to grasp the weight of her actions. The reckoning had begun, and while it was painful and emotional, it was a necessary step in our journey. Only time would tell if there was a way forward, if we could find a path through the devastation and rebuild what had been lost. The tension between Emily and me had reached a fever pitch. My actions, calculated and deliberate, were beginning to take their toll. Each day seemed to bring a new revelation, a new way to expose the depth of her betrayal. The emotional stakes were higher than ever, and I could see the effects of my revenge on her increasingly fragile state. One morning, I decided to escalate my plan. I had collected more evidence, this time focusing on how her affair had affected not just our relationship, but also her career and social circles. I knew that to fully grasp the consequences of her actions, Emily needed to confront the fallout in all aspects of her life. "Emily," I said one morning as she was preparing breakfast, "I've scheduled a meeting with a few people from your company. They're going to come over today to discuss a project you were involved in. I thought it might be helpful for you to update them." Face turned pale, and she looked at me with a mix of confusion and anxiety. "A meeting, Rob? I don't remember scheduling anything like that." "I arranged it," I replied, trying to sound casual. "It's a bit of a surprise. I thought it would be good for you to catch up on work before diving back in." She nodded, though her apprehension was evident. As the day progressed, I made sure to keep up the facade of normalcy. I greeted the guests at the door, all of whom were colleagues of Emily, and ushered them into the living room. They were there to discuss a project that Emily had been involved in, but the real purpose was to add another layer of pressure. As the meeting began, I watched Emily's face as she interacted with her colleagues. The discomfort was palpable. Conversations were polite but strained, and I could see the stress etched into her features. I knew that this was just the beginning. During a break in the meeting, I seized the opportunity to subtly bring up the subject of her recent absence. "It's great to have everyone here," I said, addressing the group. "Emily's been working so hard, even while she was away. It must have been quite a challenging trip." Emily shot me a warning glance, but I ignored it, continuing with my plan. "I'm sure everyone is eager to hear about how things went. I've been keeping myself busy with some of the details she left behind." The guests looked at Emily with a mix of curiosity and concern. The pressure was mounting, and I could see her struggling to maintain her composure. As the meeting continued, I could tell that the strain was starting to affect her ability to focus. After the guests left, Emily was visibly shaken. "Rob, what was that all about? You knew I had nothing to do with that project anymore. Why would you put me through that?" I looked at her calmly. "I just wanted you to understand the full impact of your actions. It's not just about our relationship. It's about how your choices affect everyone around you." She sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "That's the problem, Emily," I said, my voice firm. "You didn't consider the consequences. And now, neither am I." The emotional stakes were escalating, and I continued to find new ways to drive home the consequences of her betrayal. I began reaching out to friends and family, subtly informing them of the situation. I wanted Emily to experience the full fallout of her actions, to see how her choices had reverberated through her social and professional circle. One evening, Emily came home to find a letter waiting for her. It was from one of her close friends, Sarah, who had been a confidant throughout our marriage. The letter was filled with disappointment and hurt, expressing how Sarah had been blindsided by the news of Emily's affair. Emily read the letter in silence, her face contorting with anguish. When she finally looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks, she said, "Why are you doing this to me? Haven't I suffered enough?" I sat down beside her, feeling a mix of pity and resolve. "Emily, I need you to see how deeply this has affected everyone. It's not just about our marriage, it's about the people you've hurt along the way. I want you to confront the full extent of your actions." She shook her head, her sobs growing more desperate. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt anyone. I don't know how things got so out of control." I could see the pain in her eyes, and it was both gratifying and heartbreaking to witness. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand the full impact of her betrayal. The next phase of my revenge involved more personal confrontations. I arranged a dinner with some of our mutual friends, making sure that the topic of conversation would eventually turn to the affair. I wanted Emily to experience the discomfort and judgment of those who had once been close to us. The dinner was a carefully orchestrated event. I invited a small group of friends who were familiar with both of us but had not yet been informed of the affair. As the evening unfolded, I subtly steered the conversation toward topics related to relationships and trust. At one point, I brought up a recent news story about infidelity and its impact on relationships. "You know, it's amazing how some people can be so deceitful," I said, glancing at Emily. "It really makes you think about the importance of trust and honesty." The room grew silent, and I could feel the weight of the conversation bearing down on Emily. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face flushed with embarrassment. I could see her struggling to hold back tears, and part of me felt a pang of sympathy. But I knew that the purpose of this was to force her to face the consequence. After the dinner, Emily was distraught. She broke down in tears, her emotions unraveling in a way I had not seen before. "Rob, why are you putting me through this? I understand that I've made mistakes, but this feels like torture." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "Emily, this is about making you understand the full impact of your actions. You need to see how your choices have affected everyone around you. Only then can you begin to grasp the gravity of what you've done." She looked at me with a mixture of anger and despair. "Get it, Rob. I see that I've hurt people, including you. But it's more than I can bear." The days continued to unfold with a series of escalating confrontations and revelation. Each day brought new challenges, new ways for me to drive home the consequences of Emily's betrayal. The emotional stakes were higher than ever, and I could see the toll it was taking on her. As the revenge unfolded, I began to question my own motivations. Was I pushing too far? Was there a line that I shouldn't cross? But each time I saw Emily's pained expression, I was reminded of the hurt she had caused me, and the importance of making her confront the full impact of her actions. In the end, the revenge was not just about punishment. It was about understanding and resolution. I wanted Emily to face the reality of what she had done, to come to terms with the consequences of her betrayal. Only then could we begin to think about the possibility of healing. That was even an option. As the drama of our lives continued to unfold, I was left grappling with my own emotions. The revenge had taken its toll, and I was forced to confront the reality of our shattered relationship. The storm was far from over, and the path forward was uncertain. All I knew was that the journey was far from complete, and the consequences of our actions would continue to shape our lives in ways we could not yet fully understand. The house felt unusually quiet, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions that had been brewing for weeks. The revenge, though painful and intense, had achieved its purpose. Emily and I were both on the precipice of a final reckoning, and I knew that this confrontation would be the culmination of everything we had endured. I had been preparing for this moment, both mentally and emotionally. The evidence of her betrayal was now a part of our daily life, with every interaction, every discussion carrying the weight of what had happened. Emily had tried to reach out to me, to mend the rift, but I had remained distant, focused on ensuring she fully grasped the depth of her action. That evening, I asked Emily to sit down with me in the living room. It was a place that had once been filled with warmth and comfort, but now felt like the stage for our final confrontation. I had arranged the room to reflect a somber tone, dim lighting, and a collection of documents and photos spread out on the coffee table. Emily entered the room, her face drawn and tired. She had clearly been affected by the constant reminders of her betrayal, and her usual poise was now replaced by an air of resignation. She sat down on the couch, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Rob," she began, her voice trembling, "I know this has been incredibly hard on both of us. I've been trying to understand how to fix things, how to make amends, but I'm not sure where to start." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "Emily, we need to have a final conversation about everything that's happened. I want you to understand the full extent of what your actions have done, not just to me, but to everyone around us." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "I'm ready. I need to hear it all, even if it's painful." I took a seat opposite her, carefully arranging the documents on the table. "These are the records of everything I've found. Emails, messages, photos, they're all evidence of your affair, and I want you to see them one last time." Emily's face turned ashen as she glanced at the document. She reached out hesitantly, picking up a photograph and examining it closely. The images were a stark reminder of her betrayal, and I could see the pain reflected in her eyes. "This," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion, "is just a small part of what you've done. I want you to understand that this isn't just about infidelity. It's about the trust that's been shattered and the impact it's had on our lives." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I understand, Rob. I see the hurt I've caused, but I need you to know that I'm truly sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." I nodded, my heart heavy with the burden of our situation. "I believe that you're sorry, Emily, but apologies alone can't undo the damage. The reality is that our relationship has been fundamentally altered by what's happened." She wiped away her tears, trying to gather her composure. "Is there any way forward, Rob? Can we find a way to heal from this?" I took a deep breath, considering her question carefully. "I don't know, Emily. The damage has been done, and it's up to us to figure out how to move forward. But it's important for you to realize that healing will take time, if it's even possible." Emily's shoulders slumped, and she stared at the documents with a sense of defeat. "I can't believe how far things have gone. I wish I could go back and change everything." I sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. The revenge had been intense, and while it had achieved its purpose, it had also left scars on both of us. The process of confronting the betrayal had been cathartic, painful, and I could see that Emily was struggling to come to terms with the reality of our situation. "Emily," I said softly, "the truth is that we've reached a crossroads. We need to decide what comes next, whether it's trying to rebuild what's been broken or acknowledging that our paths have diverged." She looked at me with a mixture of hope and resignation. "What do you think we should do?" I took another deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. "I think we need to be honest with ourselves about what's possible. If we choose to try and rebuild, it will require a tremendous amount of work and commitment from both of us. But if we decide that it's too late, then we need to accept that and begin to move on." Emily nodded, her expression one of quiet acceptance. "I understand. I'm willing to do whatever it takes if there's a chance to rebuild. But I also know that it's going to be incredibly difficult." I reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch despite the pain between us. "We'll need to take it one step at a time, Emily. It won't be easy, and there will be moments of doubt and struggle. But if we're both committed to facing the challenges, we might find a way forward." She squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I know I have a long way to go to prove that I can be trustworthy again." As we sat there, holding hands in the dimly lit room, I realized that our journey was far from over. The road ahead would be filled with challenges and uncertainties, but it was a path we would have to navigate together, if we chose to. Final confrontation had brought us to a place of raw honesty and painful reality. We had faced the truth and acknowledged the consequences of our actions. Now, it was up to us to decide how to move forward, whether we would work to rebuild our fractured relationship or part ways and seek our own path. As the night wore on, we talked about the future and the possibilities that lay ahead. The decision was far from clear. The conversation was a necessary step in our journey. We both knew that the road to healing would be long and arduous, but it was a journey we were willing to undertake for the sake of our relationship and our own sense of closure. In the end, the final confrontation was not just about resolving the past, but also about facing the future, honesty and determination. It was a moment of profound realization and a chance to begin the difficult process of healing, whatever that might entail.